I wanted to go ahead and model for you how I would have approached solving the 4 problems that are given in our textbook under section 2.7. There's many different ways that you can approach word problems, and there's nothing to say that one method isn't really better or worse compared to another as long as you're getting to the same correct final answer. But I do think that the 4-step process that our book discusses in George Bly's method is very, very helpful in really what we do kind of intuitively when we're solving these problems anyway. So I want to go ahead and just talk a little bit about strategies and be a little explicit about kind of what I think of and what goes through my head when I'm solving these problems, in the hopes that I can help you all start kind of thinking about these problems in a similar way and be able to solve them on your own as well. So the very first problem from our textbook on page 140 talks about you have 3 picture frames that you plan to hang next to one another on a section of the wall 48 inches wide. The frames are each 100 inches wide. To make them look good on the wall, you plan to make the blank wall space between each frame identical and put the same amount of space between the ends of the wall and the edges of the nearest frame as well be identical. Each frame has a single hook in the center of the back. Where should you put the 3 nails needed to hang the frames? So the first thing I do is kind of what I did with you guys right now. I read through the problem once just to get a sense of what is going in our problem. What are they asking us for? What sort of information did they tell us? Then I go through and I read it a second time, pulling out kind of the key bits of information and trying to kind of pull them out of this big paragraph of text into something that's more simple. So it could be just writing the numbers alone by themselves, on a blank sheet of paper, or what we're going to see right here is drawing a picture is often really, really helpful in understanding what is happening in our problem. And even sometimes in the act of just drawing the picture, we figure out how to solve it. So the very first step in Bly's 4-step method is to understand the problem. So we need to take this paragraph of text and make sense of all the things that they told us. So the first thing I did is drew myself a picture like you guys see below. So I drew my wall, which is this big rectangle, and I placed my 3 picture frames. And your pictures don't have to be exact or artistic or anything. They just need to be a rough sketch, so that way you can see what's happening. So I can go ahead and start marking up my picture. So I know that the length of the wall is going to be 48 inches. So aside from the number, we definitely want to include units because there are definitely times when your units don't match up. So we always want to make sure that the units that they give us in the problem are really clear and that we can notice when the units are not the same. The next bit of information, as they said, each picture frame was 10 inches wide. So this is 10 inches. This next one is 10 inches and 10 inches. And then they gave us actually some really important information in the next part, even though there wasn't any numbers in it. So sometimes people say, like, you only have to write down the numbers you see in the problem, and that's not really true. Like, you have to pay attention to all the details. So here, we want our picture frames to be identically spaced. So that means the space between the wall and the first picture frame, in between the first and the second and third, and then the last space from the third picture frame to the wall, we want these to be the same, right? And of course my picture is not to scale because some of the spaces definitely look, more wide than others, but that's okay. Again, we're not needing to make this exact. It's not a scale model or anything. We're just trying to take the information from problem and put it in a picture. They also told us that our picture frames are going to hang on hooks that are located in the center of the frame. So I'm going to actually draw my little hooks here, imagining they were already perfectly spaced and in place, right? Those are my hooks. And then the very last statement is really important. We need to know, what are we trying to work towards? What are we trying to solve here? We're just not randomly doing math. We're trying to work towards something. So the something that we're working toward is figuring out where are we going to put those 3 nails. And that's sometimes, we get so caught up in the math or trying to figure out the problem that we forget what we're working towards, right? I need to know the location of the nails, right? That's super important, right? That's what we're asked to solve. So now that I've drawn myself a picture, I've completely gone through step 1 of understanding the problem. And by drawing this picture, I probably have already figured out some ideas about how to go into step 2, which is to devise a plan. So one option is, I can clearly see in my picture, I know the blue, measurements, but what I'm missing are the red measurements. So that's kind of the next step, is to figure out what are those red spaces, right? Once we know the red spaces, we'll know all the measurements on the wall, and conceivably we could figure out the location of the nails. And so your textbook, walked you through this step by step, but in a real life, situation, you're not going to have a, step-by-step process listed out. So I wanted to solve this without all of that. So I might vary a little bit from what the textbook described, and that's fine. There's multiple ways to solve these problems. Don't feel like yours can't be done the way you did it. So the first thing I'm going to do is try and figure out, if I think of those 10-inch frames covering up my wall, I want to try and figure out the parts that aren't covered up. So what I could do is take the total length of the wall, which is our 48 inches, and let's subtract off what is currently covered, right? So I have 3 picture frames. They're each 10 inches. So altogether, that's really 30 inches that is used up on our wall, since it's covered by the pictures. So then if we subtract the total length of the wall, our 48 inches minus the 30 inches that our 3 picture frames are covering, what we're left with is 18 inches of space on my wall that I can put into those 4 red markings. Now here's another critical thing. There's 4 of them. I probably would not have thought that there were 4 of them if I hadn't drawn a picture. So that picture part is super important. If you can draw a picture of your situation, it's usually going to help you solve these. So please, by all means, draw yourselves a little sketch. More than often than not, it'll help you in solving the process and the problem than not. So it's worth trying nonetheless. So I know I have those 18 inches that we're going to go ahead and divide into the 4 equal pieces. Now some people ask me, how do I know how to divide? Well, think of the process or the math that's happening, right? I'm trying to break something into equal pieces, right? Anytime you have a total that you want to break into equal pieces, that's an indicator of division. In the same respect, right, if I had multiple pieces that I want to add up repeatedly, we know that that is multiplication. So thinking about kind of what you want to do can often lead you to the operation that you need, right? So if I take my 18 and divide it by 4, I get 4.5, and then here, again, we need to be really careful to include units on everything. I had 18 inches, so when I cut it into 4, I still have measurements in inches. So now I know each of these measurements up here is 4.5 inches. So I can even start adding to my drawing. Okay. So I have devised a plan, which is to figure out the blank spaces on the wall. I carried it out, which is step 3. And now we're kind of going into step 4, which is our check, right? Did I really answer the question? Well, I put those 4.5s on my wall, but I never really answered where I need to put the nails. So because I realized, I really haven't answered the question, I can go back and start revising my problem-solving process to find anything that's missing. So I know all the spaces on my wall. Now I need to find the location of the nails. Now here, they didn't specify how they wanted us to describe that, right? They never said you have to measure from, say, the left wall or the right wall or from the center. They just said where to put them. So because of that, we could have our answer given in a bunch of different ways. So for me, how I thought of that, because I've actually done this, right? I've hung pictures and wanted to get them spaced just so, in order to have them equally spaced. I know from experience that, measuring from one nail head to the next usually ended up with me screwing up. Like I ended up putting, extra space on one of my spaces, and then usually it threw things off. So the strategy that I developed from actually doing this in real life is to always measure from a wall, right? Because if you're always measuring from a wall that doesn't move, then your measurements will be more accurate. So when I first saw this problem and was working it out, that's what I thought, is I need to do my measurements from, say, the leftmost wall or the rightmost wall. So I'm actually imagining in real life me measuring this out. And that's another kind of nice strategy that I really suggest too, kind of like drawing a picture. If you envision doing that problem in real life and what sort of information you need to know to solve that problem or to go through those actions, then usually that'll help reveal some solutions too. So really try and make it something where you envision what you doing the same process. So I drew my picture again, just because I want to kind of clean up my diagram a little bit since I have a bunch of different markings on my top one, and also maybe make it a little bit more readable to somebody that was looking at this. But you didn't have to do that, right? We could have also just written out our answer in words too. So the first measurement, if I'm going from this left wall, the first bit I'm going to cover is the 4.5 inches to hit the edge of the frame. Then I put that green dot in the center because that's what our problem said to do. So really I do have a little bit more math to figure out here, and that's where would that green dot be? So if my picture frame is 10 inches wide and I put that little green dot in the center, then that means I'm going to cut this also in half. So I have kind of 5 inches on each side there. So if I look at those measurements, right, I go from 4.5 to the edge of the frame and another 5 inches to the nail head. I would need to add those up. So 4.5 plus 5 means the first measurement here is going to be 9.5 inches. Okay. Now from here, you could have done a different solution and just figured out, like, okay, from that nail head, how do I get to the next one, right? So I would cover 5 inches from the nail head to the edge of the frame, and then 4.5 inches between the frames, and then another 5 inches to reach the center of the second frame. So 5 plus 4.5 plus 5 is going to get you 14.5 for the next little bit. Now I did mine a little bit differently because I always started from the leftmost wall. So in my case, I was at 9.5. I would add the 5 inches to get to the edge of the frame, another 4.5 inches for the space, and another 5. So when I combined all those together, I got a total length from the leftmost wall as being 24 inches. Right? And those little double kind of quotation marks is just shorthand for inch. So if you ever see those, it's commonly used just to make the notation easier. So you can do that or just write out inch. And then again, we need to keep track of where we're at, right? So if I was right here at this nail head, I need to figure out again the spacing to the next. So it's very similar to what it was over here. It's 5 inches, right, from the center of our frame to the edge of the frame. Add that with 4.5 for the space, and then another 5 to reach the other edge of frame. So the two center frames are actually, the nail heads are wider apart, right? It's only 9.5 inches from the leftmost wall. It's 14.5 inches between the first nail head and second, another 14.5 inches from the second to the third nail head. So for me, I would just go through and add all my measurements. I was at 24 inches for the center nail head, and then another 14.5 inches. If I add that, for my measurement, I got 38.5 inches. But again, your solution may have been set up a little bit differently, right? You could have just described the spacing from one nail head to a next. You could have described it from the center of a wall. As long as you're explicitly stating or somehow showing that solution, then you've answered the question. And then the one last bit that's very helpful here is to finally check that, right? I found what they were asking for, but did I find it correctly? So here is how I checked it is, if I'm right here on this last nail head, I want to make sure that this last space matches up with what I expect it to be. So if I go up to my top picture here, the leftmost side, or pardon me, the rightmost side, would have a space of 4.5 inches between the wall and the frame, and then 5 inches to the center of the frame. So 5 plus 4.5 would mean that that last space needs to be 9.5 inches. And then this is where I check myself. We know the total length of the wall is 48. So if I took 38.5 inches and added 9.5, do I still have the same length of wall, right? If I exceed the length of the wall or I'm too short, then we know we did something wrong. So when we add those up, we do in fact get